In a small village nestled between green hills and winding rivers, there lived a man named Dan. He was a man of wealth, a man of power, and a man whose love for women was known far and wide. Riches. He had them in abundance, but what he truly craved was attention, admiration, and most of all, women. His wealth meant he could buy anything his heart desired, and that included the hearts of many women. Each time Dan spotted a woman who caught his eye, he showered her with gold, gifts, and promises of riches beyond imagination. It was a game for him. And the women? They were drawn to him like moths to a flame, all too eager to bask in his lavish world. But there was one woman who stood apart from the rest, Adaku. Fiercely beautiful, powerful, and unyielding, Adaku wasn't like the other women who fawned over Dan. She was strong, stubborn, and had an iron will. No one in the village dared cross her, for her eyes burned like fire when she was angry, and her words cut like a blade. But despite her fire, she loved Dan with all her heart, and so they married. Though their union was filled with love, there was tension. Dan couldn't stop himself from chasing after new women, and Adaku, though deeply in love, was consumed by jealousy. Her heart burned with fury every time she saw Dan talking to another woman. She would fight, scream, and send them running. But despite her fiery anger, she stayed by his side, watching and waiting. The village knew that Dan's love came with fire, and Adaku was the storm that followed him wherever he went. But little did Dan know, trouble was brewing in his house. Adaku's love was strong, but it was also destructive. The sight of Dan with other women made her heart ache with betrayal. One day, Dan came home with shocking news. He had married another wife. Her name was A.E., and she was beautiful, so beautiful that even Dan couldn't resist her. Her smooth skin and quiet smile dazzled him, and A.E.'s presence stirred a storm in Adaku's heart. The peace that once reigned in Dan's house began to crumble. Adaku's jealousy grew with every passing day, and A.E. became her target. Adaku's fury knew no bounds. She made A.E.'s life unbearable, ordering her around, forcing her to work tirelessly, while Dan remained blissfully unaware of the tension in his own home. A.E., gentle and quiet, was no match for Adaku's rage. Her life became a living nightmare. Yet there was no one to save her, for Dan was too distracted by his endless desire for new women. It wasn't long before another woman entered the picture. Neka. Beautiful, young, and full of ambition, Neka's eyes gleamed with promises of wealth. She wasn't in love with Dan. She was in love with what he could offer. She married him quickly, her intentions clear. When Dan died, all his wealth would be hers. The balance of power in the household shifted once again. Adaku, once the queen of the house, now found herself threatened by Neka's boldness. Neka refused to be pushed around. She would not be made a servant like A.E. She had no fear of Adaku's temper and refused to do any chores. She ruled the house with an iron fist, and even Dan's children were forced to listen to her. As the tension in the house escalated, the women began to whisper. Adaku and A.E., once enemies, now realized that the only way to take down Neka was to join forces. They knew Dan's weakness, his obsession with youth and beauty. If they could find a woman even more beautiful than Neka, they could shift his attention away from her. Neka's reign in the household would be over. Together, they plotted. One night, after days of discussion, A.E. remembered a woman from the village, Tashi. Tall, graceful, with skin that gleamed like polished clay, Tashi was exactly the type of woman Dan couldn't resist. With a sly grin, A.E. whispered, "She's perfect." Adaku's eyes lit up. They knew that if they introduced Tashi to Dan, his heart would leap, and he would quickly make her his next wife. The trap was set. They approached Tashi, promising her riches and a life of luxury. Tashi, eager to escape her humble life, agreed without hesitation. She began spending time near the palm wine stall, knowing Dan's eyes would fall on her. And just as they had planned, Dan noticed her. Her tall figure, radiant smile, and gentle demeanor were everything he wanted. Within days, Tashi was brought into the house as the fourth wife. Dan, blinded by Tashi's beauty, lavished her with attention, gifts, and love. Adaku and Ae watched in satisfaction, knowing that Neka's power was slipping away. But Neka, when she heard the news, was furious. How could Dan marry yet another woman? She was no fool. She marched straight to him, begging him to stop. Please, Dan, you don't need another wife. I am enough for you. But Dan, ever indifferent, simply waved her off. You'll get used to it, just like the others. The power in the household had shifted once again, and Neka was pushed to the margins. But she wasn't going to take it lying down. She had a plan of her own. Determined not to be overshadowed by Tashi, Neka plotted in silence. As the days passed, her anger simmered, and the tension in the house grew. She felt like an outsider, watching as Adaku and Tashi grew closer, whispering, laughing, and sharing secrets while she sat alone in the corner. But what Neka didn't know was that Tashi's patience was running thin. Neka's jealousy and Dan's neglect had pushed her to the edge. One day, when Tashi was asked to cook for the household, something snapped. The air in the house was thick with tension as the delicious smell of her cooking filled the air. It was a feast, a celebration in the making. But as the family gathered around the table to eat, Neka couldn't help but notice something was wrong. Dan, usually the first to eat, hadn't been seen all morning. Why was he absent? A sense of unease settled over Neka as she quietly stood up, searching for him. Something wasn't right. Her heart raced as she moved through the house, finally making her way to Tashi's room. The door creaked open, and what she saw inside froze her blood. There, lying on the floor, was Dan. His body was limp, his hands and legs tied with ropes. Blood stained his clothes. The once proud man lay broken, his manhood gone. The sight was enough to send the entire house into shock. The villagers, upon hearing the news, gathered outside Dan's home, horrified by the gruesome discovery. Tashi stood at the doorway, her face expressionless. Yes, I did it, she said, her voice cold. Dan couldn't stop chasing after women. He couldn't rest. I was sick of it. I knew he would marry another woman, so I stopped him. I cut off his manhood to make sure he would never marry again. The crowd gasped in disbelief, but Tashi wasn't done. But I didn't know the woman he was with was his sister, she confessed, her voice faltering. The room fell silent, the weight of her mistake crushing her. Adaku and Ae, once allies in their scheme, stood frozen. The truth came out. Tashi, driven by jealousy and anger, had acted on their words. But now, the consequences were too great. Dan's life was shattered, and the house was no longer a place of luxury and power. It was a place of horror and regret. The villagers turned on Adaku and Ae. You were in on this, they accused, and the truth became undeniable. Adaku, once the feared matriarch of the house, was now reduced to a shadow of her former self. Her jealousy had cost her everything. Ae, too, was caught in the web of lies and betrayal. And as the villagers gathered at the edge of the village to watch Tashi, Adaku, and Ae leave, a bitter silence fell over the land. The story of their treachery would never be forgotten. It was a warning of how greed, jealousy, and betrayal could destroy everything. Final scene. As Tashi, Adaku, and Ae were banished, the village was forever marked by the darkness that had once lived within Dan's house. His children, too young to understand the full weight of the tragedy, were left to inherit his wealth, but they would grow up in the shadow of their father's downfall. The tale of Dan, Adaku, and the women who betrayed him spread far and wide. It was a story of love, power, greed, and ultimately tragedy. A story of how betrayal can unravel even the mightiest of men.